Okay, it is now on. Okay, welcome everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Thank you for being here today. We are now entering into the third webinar of the Fair for All series, hosted by ARAISA in partnership with ISANS. And today's webinar is AI in Practice, Part 1, Turning Challenges into Opportunities. So my name is Florence. I am the Sector Engagement Lead at the Atlantic Region Association of Immigrant Serving Agencies, also known as ARAISA. For those of you who may not be familiar with ARAISA, we are a nonprofit umbrella organization that supports organizations like yours in the important work of helping to settle and integrate newcomers into our Atlantic Canada communities. ARAISA also serves as a collective voice and forum for our members. And today, the presentation will be in English with simultaneous interpretation available in French. So if you would like to activate the interpretation, just locate the interpretation button at the bottom of your screen, and then you can select French. And today we are very happy to welcome Denise Lowe and Nathan Hall to deliver this presentation. They bring with them very impressive resumes. Indeed, Denise is an English for academic purposes and teaching English as a second language teaching faculty at Douglas College, bringing over 15 years of global experience to her current role from the University of Alberta, Yonsei University, and the University of Southern California. Her experience extends to curriculum development projects, including Le Moril project with Canadian language benchmarks and the Canadian Broadcasting Company. Additionally, she has shared her expertise as teacher training through the Northwest College TEAL program in Alberta. And Denise's passion for educational technology has earned her the University of Alberta Remote Teaching Award. Nathan is the Educational Technology and Pedagogy Coordinator for Douglas College, as well as the teaching faculty in the English Language Learning and Acquisition, ELA, department, and the Teaching English as Second Language TESOL program. He also helped develop and currently leads the Douglas Educational Support Community Desk, which provides supports to all educators at Douglas College in various areas such as educational technology, universal design for learning, and open education. Nathan started teaching English in 1997 and has worked in Lithuania, Ukraine, England, Scotland, and Canada in the areas of business English, English in the workplaces, LINC, and English for academic purposes. Nathan received the Douglas College President's Distinguished Service Award in 2023 for his work in supporting faculty members as they moved their courses online during the pandemic. Nathan and Denise, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks so much, Florence, for the lovely introduction.
Thank you, Florence.
I'm Denise, like Florence said, and Nathan is my co-presenter. We're doing this as a two-part series, so I'm going to be sharing with you how I use AI and sharing you my journey of discovering AI. So I'm gonna quickly share my presentation here, and hopefully you can see it. Let me know if that works. Does that look okay for you,
good.
everyone?
Yep.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. So like I said, thank you so much for having us. Thank you so much for inviting us to this webinar series. I'm doing part 1. My partner Nathan will be doing part 2 of the series. So we're going to kind of tag team and share our experiences in using AI. By the way, this presentation will be available for all of you later on as I share my resource pack with you guys as well. So before I start, I wanted to share my land acknowledgement. I recognize my privilege as a settler from Hong Kong, and I'm deeply grateful to live and play on the unceded traditional territories of Coquitlam, including those parts that were historically shared with the Katsi and the other Coast Salish people for generations. I recognize the history, the culture, and the ongoing contributions of these Indigenous communities, and I feel honored to be a part of this land's present while also acknowledging its past. So I currently am not in Canada, but I do want to acknowledge the fact that that's where I work, play, and live. So the reason why I wanted to put this presentation or share this presentation with everyone is when I first started with this AI journey back in 2021 when it first launched, I had a lot of different mixed thoughts and confusion, as I'm sure a lot of us has. So I want to share my journey with you, and I welcome you to come down my rabbit hole with me. So we're going to first start talking about understanding AI and the value of learning, and that's kind of how my journey started. And then I'm going to share a little bit of how I started using AI outside of the classroom, because it was a little bit more manageable than doing it right away in the classroom. And also how I use AI within my classroom as I slowly progress to becoming more comfortable with using AI. And then as I was doing activities with my students, I also asked them for feedback to see what they thought about using AI in the classroom, and then what my final takeaways are. So let's get started. So these are the questions I asked myself as I was slowly trying to figure out what the heck is AI, and am I even going to have a job? So my questions were, will I be replaced by AI? What is the point of learning if AI can do everything for us? If I can just type it in and it'll spit out everything I need to know? What is my role as a language educator? Why would my students want to learn from me if they can just, translate everything with AI or get AI to teach them how to learn any language? And then if they do want to learn from me, how can AI be a value added to me or my learners? And how can I actually start using it and actually improve my pedagogy using AI? So these were all the questions, and I wanted to start with the very basics first. So I wanted to ask about what is learning? What is the quintessential base of learning? So according to humans, I went to the brain power that is humans, and I went to Wikipedia. So learning is the process of acquiring new understanding, knowledge, behavior, skills, attitudes, and preferences. And then it continues to say the ability to learn to is possessed by humans, non-human animals, and some machines. So then when I read this, I'm like, okay, great. That doesn't really help me. Then I was like, okay, you know what? Maybe I'll ask AI to figure out what they think learning is. And this is what AI told me. Oops, sorry. This is what AI told me. So it gave me a quick definition, was similar to what they found on Wikipedia. But it also summarized a couple things that I thought was a little bit more insightful actually than Wikipedia. So retention, storing information, application, applying that knowledge, and reflection. And so I was thinking, you know what? I hate to say, I kind of like this definition a little bit better. And it actually, the last 3 points, I feel like it might be currently something that human possesses more than AI does, the reflection part piece, especially. So having this understanding or having this kind of like thought of what AI is, or what learning is, I wanted to ask myself, okay, what sets us apart with AI? And my first thought was, okay, well, we have this amazing organ, the brain, and hopefully AI isn't there yet. And so I wanted to kind of look at, in terms of brain power, what is the value of learning? How does learning help us humans and our brains, and how does that affect us? So according to neuroscience, there's something called productive struggle. And what that means is that as our brain is challenged, we increase myelin, which increases our brain signals and our synapses. And that's kind of what keeps our brain going and keeps our brain trained and not turned into mush. So I'm hoping everyone here and all our students and everyone around the world is hoping that our brain doesn't turn into mush as we get older and as we continue on as a civilization. And it was really interesting. I just attended the TESOL France conference, and one of the keynotes talked about Terry Small. He talked about the importance of having an active brain. And he shared a piece of research that says bilinguals generally live 4 years longer. And I'm hoping everyone is wanting to live a little bit longer. And the importance of a resilient brain, and that if we have a resilient brain, it keeps us healthy. So the importance of struggle of learning to keep our brain active is very, very important. And I hope that everybody around the world agrees with that. So then if I know that I found out that, learning is important, but how about us as language instructors? How does language learning affect us? Language learning for us definitely is, I feel like, a struggle, therefore is definitely going to enhance our cognitive competence. I'm currently learning Spanish, and I can tell you it's definitely a struggle trying to learn all the new vocabulary, all the new grammar, putting a sentence together. So I think that I would say that it's definitely a brain challenge in that sense. I think also, I'm sure everyone agrees that as our students learn a new language, it's definitely very introspective. Like for myself, when I'm learning Spanish, there are a lot of things that I haven't really reflected on. For example, we just had our Day of the Dead presentation in my Spanish class, and I actually had to reflect a lot about, my grandma and her relationship with me and sharing that. So definitely introspective, but it's also extrospective, talking about different cultures, talking about how language carries meaning. And and definitely one of the things that I feel language encompasses in terms of culture. If we lose that, we lose culture, and it's actually a language it's actually a tool that is used to colonize. So I feel like if we don't have language and we don't preserve language, we slowly lose our culture, and definitely is not something that we're trying to move towards. I also feel like language is very interpersonal. So learning a new language, it really enhances empathy and cultural competence. And I definitely think that in our current political landscape and in our current world events, empathy and cultural competence is for sure, I feel like we would need. And I'm hoping the answer to this question, can these be replaced with AI, is no for most people, and therefore sets our value in learning a language. So I've established to myself when I was going down this rabbit hole, language is important, learning is important. Then now I kind of switched my hat. Okay, so what is AI? So I went to AI conference as well, and one of the keynotes mentioned gave a example of how we can kind of understand AI a little bit better. And Dr. Akawa said that if we imagine VR as a simulation of the world, AI is a simulation of human intelligence or learning. So if we think of that as AI as being a simulation of human intelligence, it's a little bit of easier to understand of how we can use that as a tool in language teaching. So, for example, using AI, a lot of universities now have virtual reality campuses, and some Japanese universities have started using these virtual reality campuses as their context to let their students experience a English-speaking context kind of world. And so if we think about AI, how can we use AI as a simulation of human interactions? And I'm going to show you later on, for example, how I've used AI with my students, how they can use AI to simulate human interaction in a way, sometimes maybe it's not very convenient to get real human interaction. So I'll talk a little about that later. So whenever I start with new tech, this is the process I usually take. I always start with something that's low stakes. I try to adapt a familiar activity, but I want the technology that I'm using, including AI, to be a value added. So it has to be of some function or use that's better than me just doing pen and paper. I always learn with my students. I try to make it multifunctional. And I try not to get too worried about, okay, how can I make this into a bigger project than it needs to be? And I let the technology and use of it grow organically with both my students and myself in the classroom. Of course, I'm not trying to attack everything all at once. So I first started with the first two, starting with something low stakes and adapting it to activities that I was familiar with. One thing that I thought was super important when I first started using AI is prompt writing and prompt engineering. I think both Nathan and I will talk a little bit more about that later on in both of our presentations as well. I think the really important thing is using our expertise. That's where we're the experts, is have a good idea of what you want AI to produce. Whenever you're using AI, whether it's making a worksheet, making whatever it is, have what you want, the product in mind of what you want AI to create. AI can't really interpret what you want. It does exactly what you tell it to do. So practicing writing and refining prompts is so important. And you don't have to get it right the first time. You can keep on practicing and writing, deleting, and continue to refine your prompt. The one thing that I think it's really important to keep in mind also is to anticipate different outcomes with AI. So maybe you're using a prompt that is really great the first time around. Somehow the algorithm changes. It might come up with a different result as you're going. And that's when you can refine your prompt and then again, going back to what product do you want again? So I see our roles as educators as to lead and to guide the creation process using an AI tool. It's kind of like an extension of what you can do. And if you want to learn a little bit more about prompt engineering, I have a link here this is also in the resource pack, to give you kind of steps on how to write prompts for language teachers. And selfless plug here, I'm part of the BC Teal board as well. We are putting on a seminar, and this link it directs you to a website from Brent Warner, and he's a really great AI educator that also does language teaching. And we're going to have a webinar that is in, I believe, January. I've also linked that webinar in my resource pack as well. So if you're interested in learning about prompt engineering a little bit more in detail, feel free to come join our webinar as well. So I would like to share with you how I started using AI. And because I know prompt engineering is so important, I've shared all of my prompts that I've used. And it's a great way for you to just copy and paste and just test it out on whatever, AI tool that you feel like you like to use, whether it is BART, whether it is Bing, whether it is through Copilot or through, I use ChatGPT. Try anything and everything. You can put in the same prompts and see what you get and which one you prefer. So I didn't want to start out using AI right away in the classroom because I wanted to kind of minimize the different factors that I would have to deal with. So I really started material generation right from the get-go. Just because I didn't have to worry about, if I didn't like something, I could just choose not to use it. So if you want to first start, maybe try some of those first, and then it will help you figure out how to tailor your prompt and what you can use or not use with your learners. So one thing I'm sure you guys know already is text generation. And the reason why I really liked using text generation is because I can be very specific into what I want that text to say. So one thing that I used to spend hours and hours trying to find is authentic material that had the grammar or the vocabulary that I wanted in a short amount like of text, so that I can expose my learners to the exact grammar point or vocabulary point that I wanted them to be able to see used in context as opposed to out of context. So for example, creating a 250-word paragraph in the present progressive verb at least 10 times in the style of a travel magazine, because that was the unit we were doing. So finding the right grammar, topic, length, it was a real hassle, honestly, for me. And so, oh, by the way, all of my screenshots are shared also in the link below. So you can also, when you have the access to this PowerPoint, you can see the entire chat that of what I wrote with ChatGPT as well. So having that said, this might, when I generated this, it was good, but I had to refine it a little bit. Like I said, that circle, right? It wasn't exactly what I wanted because it was a little bit difficult for my class. So I asked it to rewrite the task, the text, and this is where your expertise comes in. So as language educators, you know the level of your students. So I use the SEFR level B1, which is, I believe, um, the most accurate so far with defining the language level. And as we go, I think the CLBs are a lot more accessible than before as well to ChatGPT and AI, all the AI tools right now. So I think as we go, typing in, IELTS, TOEFL, whatever your language benchmark is for your students, I think is really, really important. And then again, I wanted to only use the top 3,000 most frequent written words. So being specific, using your expertise to tell ChatGPT what to do, it came up with a much more level appropriate and vocabulary appropriate text for my students. So, so I thought it was a little bit more useful than the first one. And of course, generating worksheets are also really, really easy. I think you guys have already, I think throughout the webinar series, I think you guys probably have already heard Johnny's presentation on Roshi AI. If not, I think he's coming up soon. Remember, he's doing a session as well. But definitely check out, if you're not comfortable with generating your own materials, it's great to use an AI tool that does it. There's another new one, I believe, called Twee as well. That's useful. So feel free to like explore as AI continues, there will just be more available for material generation for educators. So I've also asked ChatGPT to create comprehension questions. But I think one thing that is really important is to also set boundaries for ChatGPT or whichever AI tool you're using, is to not repeat any information, for example, and provide explanation if the answer is false. So I want specific in terms of explaining why the answer is false, so I can provide that for my learners. If I'm using an LMS, for example, once they click false, that automatically pops up and they get an explanation. I used to have to forego this part a lot of the times when I'm making questions, just because it would just be way too time consuming. So think of AI as kind of your teaching assistant, maybe not the perfect teaching assistant, but if you tell it specifically what to do, you can refine it to what you want. Other things you can do with ChatGPT as well is to individualize worksheets. If you get your students' consent and they're okay with you sharing their work with your AI tool, you can upload your students' writing, for example, and then have your AI tool create a worksheet to review repeated mistakes, grammar mistakes, and that it's tailored specifically to your student, for each individual student. There is no way I can create individual worksheets as an educator for every single student, but with the help of AI, you can do that. And it gives the students a lot more focused practice than and in terms of what they can work on. So, Another part of material generation that I'd like to use is vocabulary. A lot of the times I maybe find a news article that I like to use, and or if I think of a topic that I wanted just for my students to do some free writing, for example, and they're struggling with vocabulary. So for example, just quickly throw in the topic saying, okay, provide a list of 10 good adjectives to describe the benefits of recycling. You can make it more specific. You can say, okay, I would like to have, 10 adjectives describing, a specific part of recycling that you wanted them to work on, that you see that your students are not getting. And it gives you, just a quick list, takes seconds that you can quickly throw on the board and maybe ask your students to use at least 2 or 3 of them. And then if they need more help, type in another prompt saying, create a worksheet to teach these 10 words in context, and you quickly get a fill in the blank. And again, if you're not comfortable with, making worksheets, you can always go to things like Roshi AI or Twee to make those worksheets and activities and practices for you as well. One thing that I also really like to use is actually for the glossary for my students. I find that a lot of the times, especially if you're teaching students that are in a specific context, like for example, if you're teaching um, uh, uh, engineers or nurses and they have very technical vocabulary, a lot of the definitions are actually harder to understand than the text itself. So having easy to understand definitions or a level appropriate definitions is something some of my learners struggle to find in online dictionaries or whatever glossaries that they have in their books. So typing in, again, using your expertise, saying create a list of vocabulary, but only use simple English using the top 10,000 words from the general service list. And ChatGPT will use that information and provide a definition that is a lot more easy to understand than if you were just to Google it. So again, tap into what we're trained to do, and then telling ChatGPT what to do and how to create that those materials is really, really important. Again, all the prompts are there and you guys can kind of play and switch around with it. And especially, in the next session, that's kind of what Nathan is going to, help you guys do as well. Another thing that I think is another way to use ChatGPT as well is I feel like looking at grammar forms. Sometimes, maybe you're assigning different readings to different students, and a good way to kind of raise awareness for grammar is to give them, a focus. Okay, focus on, certain, grammar points as you're reading through this. And maybe you don't have time to maybe go through every single reading that, your student has selected. Maybe it's a self-selected article. Throw those in ChatGPT, ask them what is the most frequent grammar forms. It'll come up with a list. Maybe it is present tense, maybe it's past tense, maybe it's modals, whatever it is. And then or tell your students or ask them to focus on those and look at them in context. And instead of, just having them only read and not really be aware of the grammar and how the meaning is used is also a really great way to use ChatGPT as well. Maybe you don't have enough time to look at everyone's articles, but having this prompt there and having for you to just quickly run this through with them really, really helps your students kind of pick up the language a little bit as well. I feel like also using this as kind of like a grammar analysis tool or error analysis tool, again with student consent, is also a good way to look at what kind of grammar points to discuss in class instead of discussing every single grammar point. Sometimes it's hard to keep track of the most common grammar mistakes from term beginning to term end, kind of, or midterm, if you want to do a review. If your students agree to letting you upload their work to the AI tools, that you can actually consolidate a really good list of, you know, the top grammar items that you can do review with your students throughout the term and, you know, as they progress through the term as well. So for example, looking at the top 3 most frequently used grammar forms, having examples is really important as well to showcase what are the important grammar points that your students can see those examples as well. So once I kind of got used to using AI outside the classroom where I had more control, I wanted to start using AI tools within the classroom. And actually my students were a bit curious because I mean, they know AI exists. They all get told, don't use AI, the fear of cheating, all that is kind of like, you know, instilled in them. So a lot of my students actually wasn't really familiar with using AI, especially for language learning. So one thing I think is really helpful is using AI to simulate human interactions where it is not very available. So using, for example, I had students, they wanted to learn how to communicate a little bit better in terms of asking for help. So I asked them to, I gave them this prompt to practice kind of like the texting. You know, every time you know, log into any service, there's also a little chat bubble on the bottom that lets you chat with either a bot or a real human to ask for help. They found this, my students found this a lot more less intimidating than calling on the phone because they had time to think about and read what the other person was saying. And so they wanted to practice this. I used to just get them to like, email tell us and then just kind of chat with the real channel. But instead of doing that, they felt a little bit more comfortable with doing it with ChatGPT and they were able to access it all the time. So if they left the chat, they had to go back and, you know, make dinner or whatever. They can always come back to it. Whereas with the tell us chat, it would just log them off and they would have to start the whole interaction all over again. So I gave them this prompt. I'm a CEFR A2 language learner. Again, this is where your expertise comes in terms of defining the level of your students and also defining what you want the prompt, the chatbot to do. I would like practice chatting with a help desk at a cell phone company. Can you help me? And then you can set the context. You can give your students different contexts that they would want. For example, I can't log into my online account. And then ChatGPT would continue the interaction from then on. My students said that they felt a lot less intimidated because they feel like they can make mistakes. They can try out different things to say without feeling like they were being judged or that a real human person was on the other end, and there was a lot less stress as well in that practice. Another way that I adapted a familiar activity with value added here is with writing journals. So my original activity was my students would write 1 or 2 short entries every week. And I would give them brief feedback, but they didn't get any detailed feedback for their free writing practices. It would be a brief general feedback, and they would get it maybe, you know, at the end of the week, or maybe they would get it once every 2 weeks. So it wasn't very frequent. So instead, I wanted to turn this into a more more engaging activity for them where they're interacting with their own writing a little bit more. So what I wanted to do was I wanted them to, so they would write their paragraph, and then I again asked for their consent if I can upload that onto ChatGPT, and I explained all the caveats of that doing that. For example, using that whatever I upload is used to train ChatGPT. And they were all okay with it because the alternative was just to go back to the original activity, which I gave them the option of doing, that it wasn't a mandatory activity and that they were able to do either the ChatGPT version or the original version. So I got their writing, I uploaded it onto ChatGPT, and I asked ChatGPT to correct the grammar and punctuation in an academic written style at a CEFR B2. Sometimes I would have them focus on a well-structured topic sentence or linking adverbials, depending on what grammar or language point we were working on that week. Once ChatGPT rewrote their paragraph, the students were given their own paragraphs back along with the rewritten version from ChatGPT, and they had to go and read and create a noticing log of what they observed that was different. What was the improvement that they felt was in the different versions, and then they would have to make it write it in a log. And I'll show you the log later on after the next few slides. I'll show you what the log looks like. And what I noticed actually afterwards, my students really improved at self-editing, and they were much more focused on the process of writing rather than me telling them, okay, you have, five, article mistakes, or you have four, spelling errors. Instead of me telling them, they were picking out the things that they thought was important to improve, and it gave them a lot more autonomy and choice and what they wanted to focus on when they were getting that feedback from a rewritten paragraph. So they really, really focused on the process and not the product, not saying, okay, did I get 5 out of 5? Did I just get 4 out of 5? They were really more into the how their paragraph was written and edited. Another activity that I did with my students, one of our learning objectives is emailing practice. And in the original activity that I did with my students is that they would write an email. I would circulate, give feedback to each student. And then after I gave them feedback, they rewrote for me. And then they would email it to, the activities was to email student clubs. So they would email to the student clubs in Douglas College. And a lot of the times they would not get any replies or would not give any replies within the given time of our assignment. So I usually give them 2 weeks to see if they can get a reply. And if they don't get a reply, then they write a follow-up email instead of a thank you email. So they still can still complete the assignment, but some of the students would get frustrated that they weren't getting a reply, or they would get disappointed that they weren't getting a reply. Or the student clubs would be, have a very short and very not a reply that they really enjoyed, my students. So, and they also really relied on me as an instructor to give them corrections. So I wanted to change that. I wanted to help my students get a reply immediately. So I designed a emailing activity that they would do within the classroom. So the prompt I gave them, actually, I'm gonna see if I can show you the link here. So if you click on any of these links, it goes directly to my ChatGPT interaction. So I gave them the prompt. I am a ESL learner at Separate B1 level. I like to practice writing professional emails. Only give me suggestions to make changes on my own. Do not rewrite the email. Can you reply to me as practice? So this is my example email of what it like a poorly written email. And this is what ChatGPT gave me as a feedback. So they broke it down in terms of the email, the salutation, introduction. And with this feedback, I asked my students, okay, using this feedback, can you please again rewrite your email and then copy and paste it? Okay. Again, I gave it ChatGPT boundaries. Do not rewrite the email. Okay. So that my students can work on it on their own. And now I want to give you a caveat as well for this, is that sometimes ChatGPT, even if you tell it not to do something, it will still do that. So some of my students actually still got a rewritten email, and they're like, oh my God, teacher, I'm not trying to cheat. Like they're just ChatGPT wrote it for me. And so I just told them, you know what, it's okay. Like use that as an example, but I still want you to rewrite your own by yourself, in which they did. Because we did this actually in the class. So they all had me on access and asked me what to do. And then they rewrote their email. And then again, here are some changes. Again, so this process is endless. They can do it a million times if they wanted to. I only required my student to do it 2 times. So after they did it twice, I asked, okay, please only suggest major changes. Do not suggest any more minor changes. And if this is appropriate for a SEFR B1 level and it's a professional, please write a reply email to my email. Okay, so ChatGPT is like, oh, okay, this is appropriate and it's professional. here is the reply email, okay? So then immediately my students got a reply email from, said club or whatever it is that they were coming from. So then they were able to do the second part of the activity, which is to write a thank you and a follow-up email, which I then grade. So this whole process is just for them to figure out how to edit, what things to look for, and how to rewrite and edit their email. So at this part, the only thing I grade for this part is the noticing log. So for example, what I ask of them is to share their link with me so I can see their whole interaction, which part they were trying to edit, the greeting part, and the original, what they first wrote, and what was the suggestion that ChatGPT gave them and how they changed it. So I had them submit the logs to me of what they noticed and what they changed. That's what they got graded for this activity. And in terms of for the writing practice, they got graded from me for their follow-up email. So that's kind of how I kind of structured it as well. And also, by the way, I have the entire email assignment also posted in my resource pack as well. So you can feel free to look at it and use it with your class or adapt it to another activity that you're doing with your class as well. So I did want to share a little bit with you before we finish wrapping up, is that that there are a couple of things to be aware of when you're using AI with learners. It's not roses. It's not all, lovely. There are things that you need to be aware of. Is that the level of access in terms of the versions of AI tools. Currently, I think ChatGPT and a lot of the tools are giving the interactions, the free interactions, the first, like 5, 10 messages to be at a higher paid level. And as your student is continuing to use it, it will get down to the poor quality, the older versions. And with the older versions, the information and also the quality of the feedback or the outcome may not be as good as what if you have a paid version of what to expect for outcome in terms of the product. So that's definitely something to be aware of. I myself, I'm using the free version. So I kind of I always, try to get to the when it's ChatGPT 3.5 that I can see what it looks like for my students. The other thing is that you will get varying responses. So even if you give your students a very specific prompt, everyone might get a different version of the output. And I want to show you what I mean by that. So for example, with the same output, same prompt, I got a very nice breakdown of the different parts. The second time I use the same prompt here, it gave me a different breakdown. So what happened with my students when they were doing this activity is they were looking at each other's prompts and feedback, and they were saying, hey, how come like so-and-so got this prompt and this, and why did I not get this feedback? Why am da-da-da-da? So you need to be aware of how to manage it. And I tell my students, well, you're going to get different groupings, but the feedback will be similar. So managing your students' expectations of things aren't going to go exactly as your example maybe is really important as well. And I said, like for some of my students, they actually got a fully rewritten email. And as an instructor, you kind of have to be flexible and be able to adapt to that kind of outcome. And then what are you going to do in that situation? So you have to be a little bit flexible when you're using it with learners. Also, of course, you have to be aware of, wherever you're teaching, institutional policy, privacy data. I always get my student consent if I'm ever using AI tools, and I always have an alternate activity if they're, not wanting to use AI. Generally, currently, I'm really just adapting my my previous activities with the use of AI. So if they don't want to use AI, it's fine. They can just do the original activity, and I would be fine with that. And the last thing to be aware of in terms of grammar analysis, sometimes if you get your students to, do self-editing with AI, it might be a little bit hard for your learners to understand because sometimes ChatGPT doesn't explain things very clearly. And what you see here is that, the example here, we sometimes treat learning like a switch that is turned on and off. Either students can learn something or they don't. And it tells me this is a compound sentence. It tells me that they use the conjunction or, but as you can see, there is an or here and an or here. So it's very confusing for students. Like which one is the compound sentence? Where does it start? Where does it end? So be mindful of that as well. So I'm going to wrap up quickly here, just to figure out, okay, I've done through all this. Do my students prefer me or do they prefer AI? So before I had done the AI in-class activity with my learners, they didn't really think of using AI as a language learning tool. They mainly use it as a translation tool. And they didn't really understand the capabilities of how AI can help them learn language. After I designed those tasks with them, they became much more interested in learning using AI. They understood that there was a benefit of, learning of the process of writing, for example. They wanted more integration of AI in their learning, and they wanted to continue using AI afterwards. And a lot of you are probably thinking, oh my God, that means they're just going to go out and just do all these things with AI. But it's not necessarily the case. When I asked them what they preferred, they said that, AI is great. This is their satisfaction score with each of the methods. Is with AI, they were 75%, satisfied. They liked the fact that there was immediate response. They could practice as many times as they want. It was available 24/7 because a lot of our students are juggling life and juggling, different things that are happening, and they can't constantly be there at the computer all the time. So they'll step away, come back. So they really like the flexibility. But they actually really still found instructor feedback really helpful because I still, even with using ChatGPT, I actually still meet individually a lot. Every few weeks, I would meet with my students individual and give them individual feedback. And they thought that the instructor understood the context, whereas AI didn't. As an instructor, am able to see, okay, these are the pinch points that you really need to work on and focus on. I understood their needs. With AI, you need to type in all of that. Like, what are my needs? What are the things I need to work on? And the instructor has a deeper understanding. And of course, at the end, they preferred best of both worlds, right? They wanted both AI and instructor feedback. But the important thing that they mentioned in their survey that I gave them is that they wanted instructor guidance. They didn't want to do it on their own. They wanted instructor guidance. So I think most students in my class, they wanted more language learning activities using AI. They understood that it was the instructor that was the expert and helping them use AI as a tool, not as a replacement. They really enjoyed the email writing practice because they couldn't get that human interaction as easily as, if they were just to email the club, for example. So I knew I started with the first two. I ended up with doing the rest in terms of my tech approach is learning. I learned with my students. There were hiccups along the way that I had to kind of adjust, like, giving out the full email instead of, just giving the feedback. I made it multifunctional because I ended up using it with more than one activity. And I didn't actually make that a big project. It was kind of a small percentage of their mark of what I was doing. And eventually my students are asking for more and more. So growing that interest a little bit more. So we might all feel like we're now in this age of AI and, just, trying to catch up with the times. And this is how I really felt, honestly, when I started using AI. I felt like, I'm trying to keep up. And I think the thing is that AI tools are very powerful and there are more different variations of pre-programmed tools that are out there. And it really can enhance language learning, but I think it really is our expertise that will guide the learners through using these AI tools. They're not as powerful currently as we fear. They're not going to replace us yet. And if they, as it progresses, I think now is the time to kind of familiarize ourselves. I think the best way to safeguard our expertise is to just make sure that we are aware of it, what AI can do, and being aware of where it can actually maximize our student learning. As it continues to move forward, as it continues to get more refined, I think our understanding of it needs to move as well with it. And again, understanding when, where, and how to use AI tools will be very, very key as language instructors is what I think as we continue to move forward. So like I promised, this is our resource pack. And there you will find my PowerPoint is here. A lot of the reference links that I mentioned of how I kind of my rabbit hole of coming down to the conclusion of using AI. And also the webinar series that I mentioned, that if you're interested in joining us as well in January. And also I have, I'm going to pass it off to Nathan, where he's going to talk about our next part 2 in December that we're going to be doing together as well. So references here. If you have any questions, feel free to email me. My contact information is here as well. And I'm going to pass it off to Nathan.
Thank you, Denise. Just to finish off with what Denise was saying there, we're not sitting here and saying that you must use AI or you have to use it in this particular way or anything like that. But I do think it's important that we understand it. And I think just like anything else, it's important in understanding to experience it. We would say that all the time with our students, and I think that's what we want to do as instructors as well, too, continually learning, continually knowing what's going on. And so I was the same kind of way as Denise. I felt like I was like just on my heels trying to figure out what it is that AI is, what is its limitations, what we can do. And it was through me just playing with it, just like Denise did, just playing with it, trying it, knowing that no matter what I do, I'm not going to break something. It's just going to allow me to be able to learn from those mistakes and things that happen. So I want to reinforce what Denise just said about prompt engineering. To me, the biggest learning curve for me was learning how to ask AI for stuff. The basic stuff worked randomly. Just you'd put it in one time, one day, and you would get one result. And then you come in another day, same tool, same thing, completely different result. And so I learned that I had to be far more detailed than I would in talking with a human. Like quite literally, I'd have to make sure I kept out idiomatic phrases because sometimes that would throw things off. I would have to try and be very, very detailed. Use 3 bullet points, use only this, use this, use this. And when I did that, it would give me a lot more refined kind of results. And so that's actually where I start with these AI tasks. So just to transition to what we're going to do, between this webinar, which Denise did such a fabulous job with, what we're going to do now is we're going to turn things over to you to be able to work on some stuff over the next while before we have our second webinar. And so what we'll do with that is you get time to play, make mistakes, find out what's going on. Don't worry if you don't have a lot of time to do it, but what I've designed is that there's a site. Denise, I'm on a tablet, so it might be difficult for me to share. Can you share that website? With that, I've designed a task per week. So if you come to the website, that's the link. On the right-hand side, you'll see tasks. If you're on a mobile device, you'll have to go through the menu to be able to do it. There's an AI tasks in the top menu as well. But if you click on the first one, it says Task Create a Virtual Teaching Assistant. That's the first task. And so this one actually comes from someone who I would highly recommend you follow along with if you're more interested in more stuff about Gen AI, and that's Ethan Mollick. Ethan Mollick writes weekly on his blog about stuff, and he is out of University of Pennsylvania, sorry, and he does a ton of work. And he is how do I say this? He's an expert and a skeptic at the same time. He's trying to break AI as much as possible, but he also sees the value in using AI. He sees both sides. And so in this one, you'll see there's this gray block that's down there. And if you just want to scroll down there real quick, just keep scrolling down. You'll see how long this prompt is. This prompt is long. And I was intrigued by this one, so you stop there. That I was intrigued by the length of his prompt that he had. And so I went through and I read through in detail about what he did. And it's, if take time to do that. And what it did is he's using this prompt to create an AI assistant for you. And then what you do is he creates, this AI assistant will create a new prompt, which is really weird. So it's like meta thinking of things. So what it does is this prompt creates a very refined, specific prompt for you, which you copy and you can paste into, say, ChatGPT. I use Copilot just because we have an institutional license for it. And so I used this and I ended up with some amazing stuff that came out of it. So I kept creating these new prompts. And this one was just a real basic one, but it just using a rubric. But play with that one, try it out and see what you think. But I think more than anything, what I wanted you to get out of this first task is seeing how detailed these prompts are in order to achieve what he wanted very, very specifically out of it. And so the more you learn and the more you begin to play with prompting, the more you realize how valuable it is to be very, very detailed and specific with AI. I always think of it as kind of like talking to a really young child who, but has an incredible amount of knowledge, but doesn't have a great deal of understanding. And so it's you have to explain in detail. No, you cannot do it this way, but you can do it this way. And so anyway, each week you'll get a new task. And those tasks will appear on that right-hand side menu that happens when you land at the main page. And each week, just kind of play around with it. And I tried to kind of look at it from these 4 tasks that you'll get in this time. Again, the next 3 will appear each week, each following week. The idea behind these was for you to be comfortable with it, not for you to do this in the classroom yet. So none of these tasks are about you doing something in the classroom yet. These are strictly just about you getting comfortable and understanding how you might be able to use AI as an instructor. When we come back again, I think it's in December 18th, got the date right. When we come back to do the next one, I want you to have had a chance to be able to play with it because I want to get a little bit more interactive. I'll do a little bit of show and tell. And then with that show and tell, I also want to be able to get information. And so in here, this is a blog. And so you can actually post your questions at the end of each of the tasks. You can post links or information about what you ended up with. And so I will collect that stuff from the comments on this site. And then I will try and use that to kind of formulate what's going to happen in the webinar. But also during the webinar, I'll be able to take more information from you as well and be able to then kind of tailor things as we go along. But the whole idea of the second webinar is for us to be able to have some very hands-on practical kind of use of it. You saw how Denise has been using it. And I would also recommend going back through the resources that she has and the prompts and the stuff that she used and try playing with those even and seeing how that works for you as well. I've used a similar thing because she used the email one. I used one recently where I was doing a thing with students about practicing doing interview. It was for my TESOL class and practicing doing an interview with prospective employer. And so it would be able to then at the end of it, it gave them feedback about how they did and maybe some recommendations about what they want. And I asked them how things went with that. And they said that it felt good to practice it, but they also noticed that it felt very, not very personal. And I think that coming back to what Denise says, we are not going to get replaced as teachers because the personal part continues to be there in language. And right now I'm also out of the country. And I was talking with someone who had a fairly strong accent and was using some language I didn't quite understand. And I noticed that in that struggle of having the conversation, it was fun. It was a great conversation. And we ended up talking for like 20 minutes. But that conversation, the struggle of trying to deal with some cultural changes, some language misunderstandings, some just understandings from an accent and that kind of thing, I found that that struggle made it much more interesting for myself. And the AI can't provide that. So it can do basic practice, but it can't replace. And so that's not what we're trying to say here. It's not about replacing. It's about supplementing and enhancing and trying to give students choice. And we're all about, Denise and I are both very much about students self-regulated learning. So it's this idea that they can take care of their own learning. And so that's what we're trying to get at with AI. We're not trying to replace our jobs, but we're trying to give students the best possible chance to learn. And this is the way to do it. It's us together with AI to be able to make this work. So that's what we're hoping to do in the next one. And I want to thank my colleague Denise for doing a great job today and a good setup for what I'm going to be doing in December. I don't know if there's anything else you wanted to add, Denise.
Any questions, anything? I think,
Yeah.
I think, yeah.
People can use the chat to ask their questions. Victoria and I will be monitoring the chat. You can also use the raise your hand function at the bottom of the screen if you wanted to, well, voice your question. So over to our participants.
Oh, I see that one about the informed consent in AI. Yeah, I know Denise giving consent and stuff like that. There's a couple of things I wanted to talk about at my session, but I'll talk about right now, and that is being aware of understanding of what happens with the data when you input it into AI. The reason why I use the institutional license of Microsoft Copilot is because we have the institutional license, all of this stuff is stored locally and it's not used as part of the training model for AI. And so that it becomes quite a bit different than using a ChatGPT or something where everything that they input into the chat then becomes part of the training model. And so also uploading or sharing any documents or anything into AI that may have copyright or intellectual property rights attached to it. Just being aware of finding the right license. There are AIs, in this case, if you do have access to Office 365 through your institution, and they have Microsoft Copilot, the Copilot Enterprise license does keep everything locally. And so as a result, there is no data storage. It is all only kept locally, or in this case, in ours, it goes to Montreal and back, and that's it. It's not stored in their server. It's generally just accessing it. So just being aware of that kind of information, and knowing that especially when we talk about copyright intellectual property, you shouldn't be uploading anything into some of these AIs where it might then be breaking copyright intellectual property laws. Keeping in mind too that student work is also their intellectual property, and so asking for informed consent. So asking them to say whether or not they're okay with it and being very clear about that. So I know Megan was also saying that she's doing a webinar on the data usage and the data and electricity and costs in regards to all of that. And that's something you definitely need to be aware of as well too. And that is not using it just to kind of quickly check and say, oh, what's the weather for today, when you have a weather app on your phone, that kind of thing. But again, to some of the stuff, like when I'm doing like creating resources, I end up spending days and sometimes even weeks trying to create resources and do resources. And so I spend a lot of energy on my computer trying to do that already. And so sometimes I figure that the costs pay off in doing it very quickly in AI, and then editing and being done with it can sometimes be the balance I'm looking for there as well too. So yes, there are some definite environmental costs in regards to all of this. It's just thinking of the total cost in that particular case. Can I get this done in 1 minute, or am I going to be spending days on a computer trying to do this kind of thing, where there's also going to be electricity costs and data costs and that kind of thing. So there's a balance trying to find.
How lengthy was the process of introducing and teaching your students about AI, and what CLB levels were they? So I worked with a group that was CLB 4 or 5, I would say. And it was actually, I just took probably one class. So our classes are 2 hours long. And I used one class to introduce them to AI. And I asked them if they wanted to participate in this activity, giving them all the background, things like that. Some of them chose to use the free version, which I did this activity prior to us, Douglas College, getting a institutional license for Copilot. So moving forward, I'll probably use the one that is with the institution. But at that point, we didn't have access to an institutional license yet, so they were using ChatGPT with me. And they can choose to use the free version or not. Most of them actually ended up just using because they wanted to save their chat, so they wanted to use they chose to use the login version. And then yeah, it took about 2 hours to pretty much, I walked through the entire process with them because I wanted to see what they saw. I was really interested in what their experience was. So pretty much 2 hours to do that whole activity. And then at the end, we ended up writing their follow-up email the next class, in class. So could you repeat the first questions you asked the students to introduce AI? Sorry, I'm just reading here. What were some of the reasons may not want to use AI? What for the question what was the first questions you asked students to introduce AI? I'm not sure what you mean when you mean how did I introduce maybe AI to my students?
Yes,
So
that's the question. Yeah.
okay, perfect. Okay. So I actually told them that I was going to a conference with AI language learning about AI language learning, and they were very interested. They all wanted to ask me what I saw, what they could do in the classroom, things like that. So I wasn't actually ready. It's one of the kind of like what Nathan was saying. There's never really a good time to start. I feel like you kind of just have to play with it and try it out. I wasn't actually ready to start using it in my class because I still felt a little bit apprehensive. I wanted to test, like, I'm a very kind of like very focused person where I want to make sure I can
Yeah.
control it a little bit more before I jump into it. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I think we're all a little bit like this as teachers. But so I was like not ready to jump in. I was just doing it on my own, playing around with it. And my students were like, "Can we please do something?" And so I was like, "Okay, let's do something. Let's try this. I'm not sure if it's gonna work, but let's try it." So they were really, really, accepting in terms of like whatever was going to come out of it at the end. And actually really worked out. They really, really enjoyed it. And in my evaluations and feedback, that was one of the most commented piece that they really enjoyed. And why some of the students, actually for my class, all of them wanted to try it. So I didn't have very many like resistance because I think the buy-in is really important. I'm always super open with my students as kind of what I'm doing, what I'm interested in. I always tell them I love and I use other tools in the classroom, that not AI, just ed tech tools, and they kind of see kind of what my vibe is, and they're really they I had a really good group, and that's why I was like, okay, let's do this. If you have some groups that you're like, okay, this might be an issue, maybe wait a little bit and try with another group.
So may I ask, how did you introduce to your students issues of privacy, for example?
So I told
How
them
was that received? Yeah.
So I told them that, one of the things that one of the things that AI does is to use your language and what you're putting in there as a training tool, right? So I always tell them like not to put any private information, don't put any, personal like, birthdays, data, whatever it is. When they sign up, I just tell them you can use, whatever, because at that point we didn't have an institutional account. So I just asked them to use whatever, like fake email if they want, or, whatever, like, generic email, kind of thing. So I tell them that they can always do that. And I don't that's not for me to monitor. And I tell them that, I always give them a choice in terms of whether they want to input any, but I always tell them to not put any personal information. But I tell them everything you put in, it stores and it's saved and it's used to, whatever it is used to, but back there kind of thing. So I always tell them.
And it's not yours anymore, right? I mean, it becomes their property.
Exactly.
That's how I'm trying to explain it to my own students. It's not your property anymore.
Yeah.
So
It's saved.
Mhm.
Exactly. It's not, you don't own that and they
You
can
don't
use
own
it
it.
however, however they want. And and I think by telling them not, like for me, the most important thing, like writing a fake email online, I don't think they're losing anything. I think it's really important that
Yeah.
whatever task you're designing, that you don't incorporate any information that is important to be uploaded. So I always tell them that. Yeah.
May I ask something about intellectual property in terms from a teacher's point of view? When you're when you're designing something like worksheets or texts, or, I mean, at the end, really, I don't own that anymore, right? Same thing. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, for sure.
And that's something really to tell colleagues and teachers, because if you plan to publish or do something later on, that has enormous implications as far as I can see.
For
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
I mean, just kind of like how you would credit kind of, where you're
Yeah.
getting information from, right? I think it's the same thing. I think it's the same
Yes,
thing.
and I wanted to ask, for example, like I'm teaching a 7-8, so I'm just curious, do you ask your teacher, do you ask your learners to cite uh artificial intelligence?
Yes.
And if so, how?
Yes.
So one of the things I do with my students, just like what you is I ask them to, if they can't give me, like for my lower learners, I ask them to do a very simple citation, whereas to share the link or screenshot whatever they're doing with AI to me. So that's
Okay.
kind of like a low level citation that telling me this information, this is how I got this information. I
Okay.
think Nathan, you probably used it with like where to do like APA citation format as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Want to talk a little bit about that, Nathan?
I
And
do
different.
APA formatting. So
Yeah.
I do have the actual APA reference on how to do that, where you reference the date, it was the prompt, and that kind of thing. And so I have my students do it that way, but that's because I'm trying to get them prepared for college and where they're going to be using that kind of thing. But I model it as well to all of the resources I give them. If I've done anything with prompting, I also have it, and so they have a lot of examples for it, and I take them through on how to do that. But yeah, I'm using full APA referencing for that. So yeah.
So did you say, sorry, I missed the very first part. Did you
No
say you
problem.
had a link for that, or do you,
Oh,
are they, is there
I
anything
don't,
I
but we'll
could?
put that in the
No,
resources.
okay.
Yeah, I'll send it
Okay.
I'll send it to Denise. I'm away right now, so once I get back to the office, I'll make sure that
There's no rush. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah, for your questions. And there was also a raised hand from Dana and a new question in the chat from Arda. So Dana, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. Hi. I just have a question with regards to lower level learners. I teach a pre-benchmark class, has a lot of literacy students in it. We do, and a lot of their computer skills like outside of the class are limited. Like I have students who are still working on like how to use a mouse, how to type their email address, that kind of thing. So I was just wondering if you ever had, or if you know of anyone who has done this kind of work with, people with very low levels of language, and if so, because some of it is beyond my students, but some of the things, I try to introduce them to technology. Some of it could be interesting, like getting them something to correct their work, for example, so they get instant feedback. But I'm very cautious about getting my students to do anything, like even to create an account, because I know they can't read the EULA, and some of them really don't fully understand the privacy risks involved with the internet, because they're not using it a lot. So have any of you ever worked with learners where the communication would be an issue, like even having that conversation with them, they'd have trouble with the language and they probably wouldn't understand fully the risks involved? Have either of you ever worked with learners in that situation, or do you know of anyone who has? And if so, how, or do you have any suggestions as to what might help?
So
I haven't.
I haven't had any experience working with literacy learners or like low level learners with AI. I think that I would say If you do, first of all, I would probably use it with something that is if you can use the non-registered account where it doesn't save information, that would probably be the first. If they don't understand, if it's hard to explain the intricacies of what that means to upload information, I would
Yes.
probably use the non-registered one. You won't get as high of a quality with the interactions that you get, but it's still a way to go. And in terms of I think you would have to be very, very specific in terms of showing them copy and pasting the prompt and then what you want ChatGPT to spit out to you. I think the prompt part is probably the heaviest workload for you in terms of trying to figure out what to put in. What do you think, Nathan?
Yeah, that's a toughie. I'd have to think about it a little bit because I'm always at a point where I'm working with, I mean, really probably the lowest level I work with would be like CLB4, CLB5 kind of range. And so I would have to think about it. I don't know of anybody, but of course I used to work with literacy instructors and stuff from when I was working with Listen here in BC, which is the language instruction support for Link. Yeah, I have to explore that. Maybe I'll try and investigate a little bit about that before the next webinar and see what I can find, because off the top of my head, I wouldn't know, and I wouldn't pretend that I would be an expert in that area. So yeah.
Thank you. I mean, at the moment, I'm thinking it might look more like something that I might be able to use as an instructor to create materials for them, but that's my feeling at the moment. But if there was something else that's some way, if somebody else is doing it, I'd love to know about it. Thank you.
I'll see what I can find. Yeah.
That's how I started too, though. I also feel like I
Yeah.
shouldn't use, like I couldn't use it with my learners until I started playing with it a little bit more. So I don't feel like I'm an expert in this, I think we're all just trying to figure out what works best for us, and pick and choose what you want and how you want to use it is really important, I think.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. And then I think there's another question. Have you tried image generating activities? I have played with image generating. I have this idea that I haven't really fleshed out yet. I'm hoping to get my students to, work on like descriptions and descriptives, and having them to kind of like work on their adjectives using image generation. But I haven't actually tried it out yet. So that's kind of just a little idea that's budding for me. How about
Yeah,
you?
that's what I'm thinking too. And I was wondering
Yeah,
like what kind
yeah,
of different results we would get by just changing the words. Because I've tried image generating, like I played around with myself, and it's amazing the differences that you get by just changing the prompts just a tiny little bit, right? And so for them
yeah.
to see, and I wonder if like they would make mistakes, and if those would be reflected in the images in any kind of consistent way. That would be really interesting. But so then I was wondering if you try something like that.
Yeah, I
But
haven't
you
tried it
thought
with
about it.
students.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the idea is budding in my head, but I haven't
Yeah.
actually had the chance to try it with my students yet. So I
Okay,
would
well,
love
thanks
to
so
No, I
much.
know
haven't.
if you try it, let me know, email me.
Yeah.
I would love to know.
Yeah, Nathan, I was wondering because you like work with the prompt generating, and it's such a intense like
Yeah.
prompt engineering thing, right? For the images.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean for myself, it's the same thing. I had a funny one where I was trying to create this simple scene, and I can't remember all the details, but I had to do something about a computer in a field surrounded by a fence. I don't remember why I had to, and it kept putting the fence right through the computer. I don't know why, and it was just no matter how I tried to image generate this thing, it could not do it. And so that's kind of put a little caution to me that even me trying to get this to work couldn't get it to work. I can't imagine my students trying to fight with that as well too. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
that's part of my hesitation too. It's like, yeah, if you can't do it, if I
yeah,
can't do it, what are they just going to end up being frustrated? So I had my doubts too. Thank
I
you.
don't know. I haven't done it yet, but mostly I'm focused on the writing part. Although coming back to the literacy one, I'm curious about the speaking one. That'd be really fun to kind of all of a sudden get use of where the apps have allowing you to be able to speak and have a conversation with AI. That's again percolating in my head too. I don't know if there was anything else. The image generation tool I use, I'm primarily using, I typically use Copilot just because of an institutional license, and it seems to work pretty well for me. But I have played around with some of the other ones as well too. There are lots better generators than Copilot, but because I'm not focused so much on image generation, I don't really play around too much with those. I don't know if Denise has.
I haven't really gotten into deep dive with image generation either. So it's just kind of an idea that I'm like, oh, that would be a really fun thing to do. So I haven't really, done any deep dives for image generation either. Mainly writing, because I was teaching a writing class when I was doing all this.
Use Canva, but haven't used their AI for that yet. It's always a
I
yet.
know Midjourney is super popular,
Yeah,
so
Midjourney.
trying to use that. But
I
actually,
tried,
I
but
have actually
file
played
with
with the Adobe one as well.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Because we have institutional license in Photoshop, so of
Yeah,
course
that's why. That's why. Yeah, we're like using all the things that are available to us.
And that's the other thing I may just find maybe close off with is check around and see what you have access to through wherever you work. Before you start signing up for a bunch of different stuff, see what you already have access to. Because I think that making use of what your students and you have access to is where I would focus your attention. So. Sorry, I'm on the tablet, so I have to toggle between the chat here. So.
Thank you for. Oh yes, thank you for the translation. 100%.
Yes. Huge kudos to the translators.
Yeah. Prompt activity created for us. Yes.
Yeah, I'll take a look at that video afterwards. It
Yeah.
sounds interesting.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Maybe last chance for questions in the chat or by the raised hand function before we wrap up. All right. Well, thank you so much, Denise, for your presentation, for sharing your knowledge, the tools, and your expertise. It's very much appreciated. And Nathan, we very much look forward to part 2 next webinar on December 18th. So I don't see any more questions or raised hands, so I'll leave it there. And I also want to thank our interpreters, Mike and Junior with Zero Communications, our partner interpreters. Again, thank you. Very good presentation. Very, well, I'm lost for words, but thank you so much. And we will see everyone again next month. So for your information, we do have the registration form open for next webinar. You will also receive an email with the resources that Denise and Nathan have put together, as well as the website for your homework, if we may call it like that, and and the slide deck, as well as a survey. So if participants could please fill out the survey, it's always a good opportunity for us at ARAISA and our presenters to learn and improve in the future for future presentations. So thank you again, and we will see you next month.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.